Have you ever heard a story that begins with a broken engine and ends with a love that rebuilds two lives? This is the story of a humble mechanic living a quiet life in a small Kansas town. Until one cold morning, a private jet crash lands in the field behind his garage. Inside is a mysterious woman, injured, alone, and hiding a secret that could change everything. He takes her in, not knowing she's one of the richest women in America, and not knowing that this act of kindness will transform both their lives in ways they never imagined. What happens when two people from completely different worlds are brought together by chance and healed by compassion? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about falling in love. It's a story about second chances, quiet bravery, and the kind of goodness that asks for nothing in return, but ends up receiving everything. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of kindness, redemption, and love that rises from the most unexpected places. Now let's begin. A poor mechanic finds an injured woman by the road. She turns out to be a billionaire pilot. The sun had barely begun to rise when Ethan Cole heard the sound that would change his life. It wasn't a sound he could place at first, just a low, dragging roar, followed by a thunderous thud that sent a tremor through the bones of his old garage. He dropped the wrench he was holding and stepped out onto the porch, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. The Kansas sky was still wearing its early morning lavender hue, soft and unsuspecting, but the trail of smoke rising in the distance told another story. "Not a fire again," he muttered, already grabbing his coat. The sound had come from the wheat field out back, flat, endless, golden even in the morning dim. Ethan's boots crunched the frost-covered dirt as he jogged toward the smoke. His heartbeat wasn't panicked, not yet. Maybe a small plane had clipped a fence post and crash-landed. That happened once, years ago. Or maybe it was just some idiot kid trying to joyride a crop duster. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. When he reached the field, the sight stopped him cold. There, crumpled awkwardly among the amber stalks, was a silver private plane, sleek, elegant, and completely out of place in this humble stretch of land. One wing was shattered, the nose buried halfway into the soft earth, and smoke hissed from the engine like an angry beast. But what made Ethan sprint the final yards wasn't the wreckage. It was the faint tapping on the cockpit window. Someone was inside. "Hang on!" he shouted, leaping onto the bent wing. The cockpit door was jammed. He grabbed a crowbar from the emergency kit strapped beneath the plane, wedged it between the metal seam, and pushed with every ounce of strength left in him. With a screech, the door gave way. Inside, slumped over the controls, was a woman, blood trickling from her hairline, her flight suit smeared with dirt and oil. But she was breathing. Hey, you with me?" he asked, gently patting her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open for a split second, blue-gray, dazed, beautiful in that quiet, broken way. "Where am I?" "You're safe. I've got you," Ethan said. With careful hands, he unbuckled her harness and cradled her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, strong but fragile somehow, a paradox in a pilot's suit. Back at the garage, Ethan laid her on the old leather couch in his workshop office, the only place warm enough this time of year. He stoked the wood-burning stove, boiled water, cleaned her wound, and wrapped her ankle, which had twisted in the crash. He worked silently, mechanically, like he had done 1,000 repairs before. But this wasn't a carburetor or an alternator. This was a person, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt like something inside him had shifted out of place. She slept most of the day, murmuring things he couldn't make out. Her jacket bore no name, no company badge, only a faded set of wings embroidered on the collar. He checked her pockets. No phone, no wallet, just a single silver pendant shaped like a compass, the kind given to pilots long ago. No clues, only questions. When she finally woke again, it was just past dusk. Ethan had stepped out to check on the generator when he heard a noise, a soft rustle, followed by a sharp intake of breath. He rushed inside. She was sitting up, eyes wide, arms braced as if ready to bolt. "Easy," he said, lifting his hands. "You're safe. You crashed. I pulled you out of the wreck." Her gaze flicked around the room, the tools, the grease-stained rags, the stove. "Where am I?" My garage, it's out in the countryside. Closest town's a few miles west. Name's Ethan. She didn't respond right away. Then, you shouldn't have brought me here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Would you have preferred I left you in the field? She looked away, the vulnerability in her face quickly masked by cold composure. I don't remember. I was flying. Low visibility. Engine trouble. You almost didn't make it, he said, grabbing a chipped mug and pouring her some tea. You've been out for hours. She took the cup with stiff fingers, then surprised him by drinking deeply. Her hands shook. Despite the armor in her voice, she was exhausted, physically and emotionally. What's your name? He asked. A pause, then softly, Isabel. Just Isabel. No last name, no rank, no explanation. All right, Isabel, he said. You're safe here. You can rest. No one's going to bother you. She nodded slowly, as if she didn't quite believe it. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the faded photo on the wall of a younger Ethan with a smiling woman and a little girl between them. Your family? She asked. He hesitated. Was. I'm sorry. Me too. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, meaningful, like two strangers standing on either side of a canyon, unsure how to cross, but aware that something in the air had shifted. That night, Ethan sat on the porch, staring out at the darkened field where the wreck still smoldered faintly. He knew tomorrow would bring questions, maybe trouble. Planes like that didn't just crash without someone coming to look for them. But for now, all he knew was this. A stranger had fallen from the sky and landed not just on his field, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere he hadn't let anyone in for years. And something told him she hadn't come here by accident. The next morning broke cold and silent, the kind of Kansas chill that crept in through the seams of old windows and stiffened bones before the sun dared to rise. Ethan was already up, chopping wood behind the garage, when he heard the rustling again, this time sharper, more urgent. He dropped the axe and jogged back toward the office. The door was open. Isabel was gone. Damn it, he muttered, wiping his hands on his jeans and heading into the wheat field. He spotted her easily, limping through the tall stalks in a borrowed flannel shirt over her flight suit, both too big for her slight frame. She was moving fast for someone with a twisted ankle, favoring her left leg but determined. Her breath came out in ragged clouds. Isabel, he called. She turned, stumbled, and nearly went down. He reached her in time, grabbing her arm before she hit the ground. Get off me, she snapped, trying to push him away. I'm fine. You're not, he said, not unkindly. And it's 20 degrees out here. She yanked her arm free, glaring at him. I don't need a babysitter. No, he replied calmly, but you do need a roof, and probably more than a few days' rest. You've got a mild concussion, a swollen ankle, and no ride out of here. That plane's not flying anytime soon. Her eyes darted across the field, toward the smoking wreckage barely visible through the haze. I can call someone, she said. Just give me a phone. Ethan shook his head slowly. If you wanted to make a call, you would have asked yesterday. You're hiding, and I don't know from what, but it's none of my business, so long as you're not dangerous. She looked at him then, really looked, and her shoulders dropped just a little. I just need a few days, alone. Ethan gestured toward the garage. That's all I'm offering. She hesitated for another long moment, then nodded once. Back inside, he helped her back onto the couch, propping her ankle up on a stack of old National Geographics. She didn't thank him, but she didn't resist either. They sat in silence as the stove crackled, and Ethan poured her another cup of tea. You've lived here long? She finally asked, voice low. Almost 12 years, he said. Bought the place with my wife. Figured we'd raise our little girl here, run a small shop, fix things, live quiet. Simple dream. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The silence that followed filled in the missing pieces. What happened to them? Isabel asked quietly. Drunk driver. 5 years ago last month. A beat. I'm sorry. Ethan gave a small nod. Me too. She glanced around. You live here alone now, he chuckled. Me and a couple of raccoons who think the attic's theirs. A faint smile tugged at her lips before she caught herself and looked away. You're a good man, she said. You didn't have to help me. I didn't do it to be good. You were hurt. It was the right thing. She didn't reply, but something in her expression softened. That afternoon, Ethan busied himself in the workshop, hammering out a bent fender and replacing a busted radiator for Mrs. Callahan down the road. Isabel sat by the window, reading a book he'd left on the shelf, The Old Man and the Sea. She didn't say much, but he caught her glancing at him from time to time. When evening fell, he offered her a bowl of beef stew and 2 slices of bread. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and set the bowl down with care. I used to fly across the country for business. Back-to-back meetings, boardrooms, clients who smiled with knives behind their backs. It all felt so important. And then I realized I didn't remember the last time I saw the stars. Ethan looked up from his plate. Well, we've got plenty of them here. Clearer than anywhere else I've seen. Yeah, she said. It's strange. This place, it's quiet, but it doesn't feel empty. He smiled faintly. That's Kansas for you. Not much to look at, but it grows on you. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. I don't remember the last time someone offered me a meal without expecting something in return. Ethan stood, picked up the bowls. Maybe you've been around the wrong kind of people. Later that night, she wandered into the barn. The big doors creaked open as she stepped inside, wrapped in one of Ethan's old wool coats. Dust swirled in the moonlight pouring through the slats. Tools hung on the walls like relics. A vintage truck sat in the corner under a tarp, half disassembled. She walked slowly, touching the edge of a wooden workbench, stopping to examine a framed photo on the wall. Ethan's wife, her face radiant, a little girl in her arms. She was beautiful, Isabel said quietly when Ethan stepped in behind her. Yeah, he said. She lit up every room she walked into, including this one. Isabel turned. You still love her. I always will, but I'm not frozen in place. Life has a way of nudging you forward, whether you want it to or not. She looked at him with something like admiration, or longing, or both. I don't know why I told you that, she said. Maybe because you needed to. She nodded, folding her arms around herself. I don't know where I'm going next, she said, but for now, if it's all right, I'd like to stay. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and nodded. For now, he said, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. And for the first time since she crash-landed into his field and his life, Isabel smiled. A real smile. By the 3rd day, the rhythm of silence between them had softened. It wasn't awkward anymore, just quiet in the way 2 people become when they start to learn the shape of each other's presence. Ethan rose early, as always. Isabel, still moving carefully on her mending ankle, had begun joining him for breakfast. Instant coffee and toast, the kind of humble fare she would have scoffed at weeks ago. But something about the way Ethan poured her cup without asking how she took it, just knowing, made her feel settled. Like maybe she didn't have to perform anymore. The garage buzzed with life by mid-morning. The clang of tools, the creak of the garage door, the occasional hum of a classic engine sputtering to life. Isabel sat near the open bay door, a patchwork quilt over her legs, notebook in hand. She wasn't writing much, just watching, listening, breathing. You're up early, Ethan said as he ducked out from under the hood of a battered '78 Chevy. His hands were stained with grease, the kind that never truly washed off. Didn't expect you to brave the cold. I figured the couch was getting tired of me, she replied with a half smile. And your coffee's starting to grow on me, he smirked. That's either a compliment or a cry for help. Isabel tilted her head. Both. A silence passed, comfortable again. Where'd you learn all this? She asked, gesturing to the scattered tools, the disassembled parts, the tidy chaos that was his domain. My dad was a mechanic, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Taught me everything. I could change oil before I could ride a bike. She smiled. Sounds like a good man. He was, Ethan said. Didn't have much, but he never let anyone walk out of his garage without a working engine or a warm meal. Isabel looked down. That sounds rare. Ethan studied her for a second. What about you? Ever get your hands dirty? She laughed softly. Not exactly. I grew up in boardrooms and airfields. I was flying before I could drive. Mechanics handled the grease. I handled the altitude. Private jet pilot, corporate, and charity work, medical supply drops, that kind of thing. At some point, I started living at 35,000 feet just to avoid having to make any real decisions on the ground. Ethan nodded. And now you're grounded. Seems like the universe thought I needed a forced landing. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson from down the road arrived with her pickup, sputtering smoke like a dying dragon. Ethan, darling, I think I blew a gasket, she said, leaning out her window, her white curls bobbing. I'll take a look, Ethan said, already waving her into the bay. He popped the hood, propped it open, and within seconds had his head buried in the engine. Isabel watched as Mrs. Henderson climbed down slowly, wincing with each step. Her cane thudded against the concrete. Let me help, Isabel said, rushing to her side. Careful, the floor's slick. Well, aren't you a sweetheart? The older woman said, smiling. You're the one from the accident, aren't you? Isabel stiffened, then nodded. I am. Well, thank heavens Ethan was the one who found you. Man's got a heart the size of Kansas. Isabel glanced toward Ethan, who was working in silence, unaware of the praise. Yeah, she murmured. He does. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Ethan brought in 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Isabel, who was now perched on an old stool by the workbench. I saw you sketching earlier, he said, nodding at the notebook in her lap. She flipped it closed quickly. Just doodles. You're a pilot and an artist? Hardly, she said, embarrassed. I used to draw a lot, but it felt like a waste of time in the business world. Everything had to be productive, measurable, optimized. Ethan blew on his coffee. And now? Now I think wasting time might be the most honest thing I've done in years. That made him smile. You're welcome to waste it here, as long as you like. She didn't answer right away, just stared out at the last streaks of gold fading from the horizon. Do you ever miss it? The noise, the movement, the world outside this place? Ethan considered that for a long beat. Sometimes, but noise doesn't always mean life. I learned that the hard way. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. Yeah, I think I did too. Later that night, after she'd gone back to the couch with her quilt, and he was cleaning up the tools, Ethan opened the drawer beneath his workbench. Tucked inside was a faded envelope, creased, smudged, loved too long. He took it out, traced the handwriting with one finger, and then placed it back. He didn't know why, but Isabel's presence had made the garage feel less like a memorial and more like a beginning. As he turned off the lights, he passed by her sleeping form. She stirred slightly, murmured something under her breath, then went still again. A lock of hair had fallen across her cheek. Without thinking, Ethan reached down and gently brushed it back. She didn't wake, but something in him did. The first snow came quietly that morning. A thin veil of white dusted the golden stalks in the field, blanketed the rusted truck in the yard, and traced soft outlines along the roof of Ethan's garage. The whole world seemed to pause, exhaling into the stillness. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove hummed softly, casting a golden glow across the cluttered walls. Isabel sat at the corner table, a mug of black coffee in her hands, her eyes trained on the snow as though trying to read something in its falling patterns. Her ankle was healing. The bruises on her temple had faded to pale yellow. But Ethan had begun to notice something else, something quieter and harder to fix. The way she sometimes stared out the window too long, the way her shoulders stiffened when the radio mentioned air traffic or the word Monroe. This morning, she'd hardly touched her toast. You okay? Ethan asked, pouring himself a second cup. I'm fine, she said. The pause that followed wasn't convincing. Ethan didn't push. He'd learned not to. Instead, he reached over to the old wooden radio near the window and turned the volume down. Outside, the snow kept falling. Isabel stood suddenly and grabbed her coat. I need a walk. Your ankle. I'll take it slow. He watched her disappear down the gravel road, her figure small against the open sky. Isabel walked until the cold bit at her cheeks and the hem of her coat soaked through. The snow reminded her of winter flights over Montana, crisp skies, iced wings, and the hum of the engines under her boots. She used to feel invincible up there. Alone, sure, but free. Now she felt anything but free. The truth was never far behind. The truth had names, headlines, lawyers, and a father who'd built an empire and expected her to wear its crown without question. Monroe Aviation, 3,200 employees, a household name in commercial and luxury air travel. Isabel was supposed to be the future of that name, groomed since childhood. Private schools, Flight training at 17, whispers in boardrooms, she's the next Charles. The obedient daughter, the fearless pilot, the face of the brand. But something in her had cracked the day she signed the acquisition deal with a defense contractor her father insisted on. It wasn't just about planes anymore. It was about weapons, war, profit over people. And the man she'd been set to marry, Robert Langston, senior VP and heir to a defense dynasty, had looked at her with numbers in his eyes, not love. She'd flown away the day before the engagement announcement. Not a word to her father, no press release, no security team. Just a tank of fuel and a vague direction. Anywhere but there. She hadn't expected the engine failure. She hadn't expected the crash. And she certainly hadn't expected Ethan Cole. When she returned to the garage, she found him under the hood of a neighbor's sedan, sleeves rolled up, engine steaming. There was always something calming about the way he worked. Focused, steady, unbothered by the noise of the world. "Got some color in your cheeks again," he said without looking up. "Snow'll do that," she replied, shrugging off her coat. He glanced at her as he closed the hood. "Need help warming up?" "Actually, I could use your phone." Ethan studied her. "You sure?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah." He led her inside, pulled an old rotary phone off the shelf, and offered her privacy. She stared at it for a long time before dialing. 3 rings. Then a voice. "Monroe residence." Isabel swallowed. "May I speak to Alan Monroe?" A pause, then, "Isabel." She hung up. Ethan found her standing outside a few minutes later, staring at the horizon with her arms crossed tight across her chest. "Didn't make the call?" he asked. "I did," she said. "Just long enough for them to know I'm alive." "You don't owe me an explanation," he said gently. "I know," she said, "but I think I want to give you one." They sat by the stove again, where warmth and shadows flickered across their faces. She told him everything. The company, her father, the engagement, the plane, everything but the money. That part she still wasn't ready to say. When she finished, Ethan was silent for a while. Then he asked the one thing she didn't expect. "Were you happy?" The question hit like cold air through a broken window. "No," she admitted. "Not for a long time." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then maybe the crash wasn't the worst thing that could have happened." She blinked. "You think this, getting stranded in the middle of nowhere, is a blessing?" "I think life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be," he said, "even if we don't see it at the time." She let that settle in. It sounded simple, too simple. And yet, "When I first met you," she said slowly, "I thought you were just some quiet mechanic in a dusty garage." Ethan chuckled. "And now? I think you might be the only man I've ever met who doesn't want anything from me." He looked at her then, not with pity or awe or curiosity, but with something steadier, something real. "I just want you to be okay," he said. That night, Ethan fell asleep to the sound of wind tapping the windows. Isabel sat by the fire alone, sketchbook open. She wasn't drawing planes or engines anymore. She was drawing people, a little girl holding a wrench, an old woman in a rocking chair, a man with kind eyes standing in a wheat field. She didn't know where she was going next, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of staying put. The flyer was hand-drawn in blue marker, posted crookedly on the bulletin board at the local feed store. Isabel spotted it while picking up supplies with Ethan. Well, technically, Ethan picked up supplies while she wandered the aisles pretending to understand what sprocket grease was. Community Repair Day, Saturday Aurors 10 a.m. Free car checkups, oil changes, small engine fixes. Coffee and donuts provided. "Do you do this often?" she asked, catching up with him near the checkout line. Ethan shrugged. "Every couple months. Folks around here don't always have the money for tune-ups. This helps keep the town rolling, literally." "And you just offer it all for free?" "Pretty much. Some bring cookies, others bring a jar of peach preserves or a chicken. One guy gave me a lawnmower once that didn't even work." She smiled. "Sounds like a fair trade." He looked at her. "You want to come?" She hesitated. "Won't people ask questions?" "Probably," he said. "But they're good people. They care more about your heart than your resume." That Saturday, the garage looked less like a workshop and more like a block party. Cars lined up in the gravel lot. the smell of oil mixed with powdered sugar from a tray of donuts on the workbench. Someone set up a Bluetooth speaker on the tailgate of an old Ford, playing a mix of Johnny Cash and soft country ballads. Isabel stood to the side at first, unsure. She hadn't worn denim in years, and the flannel shirt Ethan lent her still smelled faintly of cedar and machine grease. But when an elderly man in overalls asked if she'd hand him a socket wrench, she did. And when a teenager with chipped nail polish asked how to check her tire pressure, Isabel knelt beside her and figured it out. Soon she wasn't on the sidelines anymore. Ethan watched from a distance, wiping his hands on a rag as he leaned against a jackstand. Isabel was laughing with two little boys who'd been racing matchbox cars down the slope of the garage floor. The sound was unfamiliar, light, honest, completely free of the weight she usually carried in her voice. "You're gonna keep her, right?" said a voice beside him. Ethan turned to see Mrs. Callahan, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. "She's not a puppy, Mags," he said, amused. "Maybe not, but she's brought color back to this place. And to you." He looked away. "She's got a life somewhere else." Mrs. Callahan scoffed. "So did you, until it came crashing down." Ethan didn't answer. He just watched Isabel, now crouched next to a young boy with a stutter, helping him twist a lug nut with his tiny hands. Around noon, the crowd began to thin. Isabel sat on a crate outside the garage, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. Her fingers were smudged with grease, her cheeks pink from wind and laughter. "You did good today," Ethan said, joining her. She looked at him. "I haven't felt that useful in a long time." "You've probably been useful in a million ways." She shook her head. "No, I've been efficient, strategic, profitable, but not needed. Not like this." He nudged her shoulder lightly. "You were a natural out there." "Yeah?" she smirked. "I even managed to learn the difference between a socket wrench and a crescent wrench. Next week we'll tackle carburetors." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something gentler. "I can see why you stayed." He looked at her, then out at the fading afternoon light. "This place saved me. After the accident, I couldn't breathe in the city, couldn't look people in the eye. Out here, things are quiet enough to heal." She nodded. "I get that." A pause, then Isabel asked, "Do you think people can really start over?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "I think starting over isn't about changing everything. It's about letting something good grow where something hard once lived." She turned that over in her mind. It was the kind of answer she would have dismissed in her old life. Too poetic, too soft. But here with Ethan beside her and the wind stirring the wheat just beyond the fence line, it made sense. That evening, they sat by the fire again, eating leftover chili and the last of the bakery rolls someone had dropped off as thanks. Isabel had slipped her boots off and tucked her feet beneath her on the worn-out couch. Ethan set his spoon down and leaned forward. "I saw you today," he said. "Not just physically, but you. Really you." She looked at him, uncertain. "You lit up around those kids, around the folks here. You didn't need to impress anyone. You were just you." She swallowed hard. "It scared me how natural it felt." "Why?" "Because it makes me question everything I thought I wanted, everything I was told I had to be." "You don't owe that life anything," he said quietly, "especially if it never made you feel whole." She stared into the fire. "I always thought I had to choose, freedom or love, success or peace. I never believed I could have both." He leaned back, his voice calm but certain. "Maybe you can." Their eyes met, and for a moment, nothing moved. Not the flames, not the wind, not even the quiet thoughts dancing between them. Isabel broke the silence first. "Thank you, Ethan." "For what?" "For letting me crash here, literally and otherwise." He smiled. "You're not the first soul this place has patched up." "No," she said, "but maybe I'm the first one who doesn't want to fly away again." By late November, winter had fully settled over the plains. The wheat field behind Ethan's garage lay bare and frosted, the earth quiet beneath a thin crust of snow. Mornings came slower, wrapped in mist and stillness. The garage was colder too, the old heater wheezing its protest with every new gust of wind. But inside, a subtle warmth lingered, one that didn't come from the stove. Isabel had stopped asking when she should leave. She now had her own mug on the shelf, just to the left of Ethan's. She swept the floor without being asked, made the coffee every morning, and took to repairing small things around the office. A broken lamp, a stuck drawer, even the battered old radio, which now crackled to life with scratchy jazz in the evenings. The days passed with a quiet rhythm neither of them tried to define. One afternoon, as snow drifted lazily outside, Isabel stood at the workbench, sleeves rolled up, studying the bent aluminum frame of her plane's left wing. It had been moved into the barn weeks ago, one piece at a time, until it rested on cinder blocks near Ethan's vintage truck, like a metal skeleton awaiting resurrection. "You think she'll fly again?" she asked. Ethan, crouched nearby, fixing a carburetor, looked up. "If anyone can make her fly again, it's you." She laughed softly. "Not sure about that. I was a decent pilot, not much of a mechanic." He wiped his hands and stood beside her. "Then we'll do it together." They stared at the wing in silence. It had become more than a wreck. It was a symbol of what had broken and what might still be rebuilt. Later that day, Isabel rummaged through the barn for a set of missing rivets and found herself drawn again to the framed photo hanging just above the tool rack. Ethan's wife and daughter, frozen in a moment of joy that was both vibrant and impossibly distant. She touched the edge of the frame gently, then turned as footsteps approached. "She had your eyes," Isabel said. Ethan didn't answer for a long moment. Then quietly, "Yeah, same laugh too. Loud, joyful, didn't care who was listening." "Do you ever talk about them?" "Not much. Most folks around here already know. And those who don't, they don't ask." "But I'm not most folks," she said, turning to face him. He smiled faintly. "No, you're not." They walked back toward the garage together, boots crunching over fresh snow. Isabel's breath fogged the air in small clouds. "She would have liked you," Ethan said suddenly. "Hannah, my wife. She liked strong women. Said the world didn't have enough of them." Isabel looked down. "I'm not sure I'm all that strong." "You're still standing, aren't you?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, the power flickered twice before going out entirely. "Well," Ethan muttered, lighting a lantern, "looks like the generator's taken the night off." They gathered near the stove, bundled in blankets, candles casting flickering shadows against the walls. "You know," Isabel said, "this is the most still I've been in 10 years. No emails, no meetings, no flight plans." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She considered it. "Depends on the day. But today, it's good." Shirasekano. The silence between them stretched again, soft, full. "I never asked," Ethan said. "What did you want to be? Before the company? Before the planes?" She blinked. "You mean when I was a kid?" "Yeah." She pulled the blanket tighter. "A teacher. I wanted to teach kids how to read. Maybe even art." "What stopped you?" She shrugged. "Legacy. Expectation. My father said I could always teach after I succeeded at something first." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like you let someone else write your flight plan." She chuckled. "You have a way with metaphors. I live in a barn with a broken plane and a heart held together by duct tape. I've earned a few." She looked at him for a long time then, as if seeing something new in his face. Something softer. Something unguarded. "You ever think about trying again?" she asked. "Love, I mean." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I used to think I'd only get one great love in this life, that anything after would feel like a ghost. But now," he trailed off. "But now," she prompted, "now I'm starting to believe hearts don't run out of room. They just learn to beat differently." A long pause. "I've been scared to feel anything," Isabel admitted, "because I know what it's like to be used, to be wanted for what I represent, not who I am." Ethan's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then maybe what you need isn't someone who wants you. Maybe it's someone who sees you." Their eyes met. Neither moved. The moment balanced on a wire, too fragile to name, too real to deny. The next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in clean white silence. Isabel stepped outside with her coffee and found Ethan already in the field, inspecting the fence that bordered the property. He waved her over, smiling against the cold. "You see that?" he said, pointing toward the horizon. She followed his gaze. A flock of birds rose from the wheat stubble in a perfect V, gliding through the morning air like a living compass. They're headed south, she said. Yep, Ethan replied. They know when it's time to go. She looked at him, thoughtful. Do you? His answer was simple. Only when I know there's something worth coming back to. And in that quiet Kansas morning, surrounded by snow and silence and sky, Isabel realized she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It started with the black SUV, sleek, polished, and out of place like a tuxedo at a barn dance. It rolled down the gravel road toward Ethan's garage just after lunch on a Tuesday. Isabel was inside organizing tool drawers when the hum of tires over frostbitten earth made her spine stiffen. Ethan stepped out first. The cold wind tugged at his flannel sleeves as the vehicle parked near the edge of the lot. The door opened with a click too clean for this part of Kansas. A man in a tailored overcoat stepped out, mid-40s, steel gray hair, expression sharp enough to cut glass. Isabel appeared beside Ethan a second later, her face drained of color. "Hello, Isabel," the man said. "Grayson," she replied, her voice tight. Ethan looked between them. "Friend of yours?" Grayson gave a humorless smile. "Personal security, hired by her father. We've been looking for her for weeks." "I wasn't lost," Isabel said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The press is circling. Your father is beside himself. The board is panicking, and your fiancé has already begun issuing statements." "I'm not his fiancé," she snapped. Grayson sighed. "That's a matter of legal interpretation." Ethan's brows furrowed. "She's not going anywhere if she doesn't want to." Grayson turned to him, amusement flickering behind cool eyes. "And you are?" Ethan didn't flinch. "The man who pulled her out of a burning plane and gave her a place to heal." Grayson studied him a moment. "Of course you are." Isabel stepped forward. "What do you want, Grayson?" "Just to deliver a message. Your absence has consequences. We've kept the media quiet for now, but if you don't return, the truth will find its way out." "I'm not going back." "You don't have a choice." "Yes," she said, "I do." Grayson reached into his coat pocket and handed her an envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this. And to remind you, running away doesn't change the fact that you're still his daughter, and Monroe Aviation still needs a Monroe." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked back to the SUV. The car drove off, leaving a trail of dust over snow. Inside the garage, Isabel sat on the couch, the unopened envelope trembling in her hands. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Do you want to talk about it?" She looked up, eyes glassy. "That man works for my father. His job is to clean up messes and keep reputations intact. I'm apparently both." Ethan walked over, sat across from her. "You're not a mess, and you're not a reputation." She tried to smile, failed. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "My full name is Isabel Monroe. My father is Alan Monroe. He owns Monroe Aviation." Ethan said nothing. "I'm supposed to be the heir to the company. I've been on magazine covers, in business panels, at fundraisers with people who can buy entire towns. I was engaged to a man my father approved of, not because we loved each other, but because it looked good on paper." Her voice cracked. "I walked away from all of it. The company, the wedding, my name." She looked at him, waiting for judgment. It didn't come. "So the plane, that wasn't just some joyride?" "No, it was my way out." Ethan leaned forward, hands clasped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was afraid it would change how you saw me." "It doesn't," he said simply. "You're not angry?" "I'm not thrilled you lied," he admitted. "But I've seen people do far worse for far less. You weren't trying to hurt anyone. You were trying to save yourself." She breathed out, shoulders sagging. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "I can't go back to that world, but I don't belong in yours either." Ethan stood, walked to the window, watched the wind ripple through the dry stalks in the field. "Maybe you don't have to choose," and he said. "Maybe you get to make a new world, one that fits who you are now." She looked at him. "And who do you think I am?" He turned and met her eyes. "I think you're someone learning how to live for the first time." That night, they didn't speak much. Isabel stared at the unopened envelope for hours before finally tearing it open. Inside was a check, 7 figures, and a handwritten note from her father. "Come home. You're needed. This isn't a negotiation." Dad. No warmth, no apology. just a command disguised as concern. She tore it in half. The next morning, Ethan was quieter than usual. He worked alone, fixed a snowblower, repaired a broken tail light, changed oil for a retired school teacher who paid him in homemade fudge. Isabel watched from the doorway, feeling something between regret and dread tightening in her chest. When Ethan finally looked at her, his expression was unreadable. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I don't want to." "But you might?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I get it," he said. "The world you came from. It doesn't just vanish. It waits. And eventually it demands an answer. I'm not sure I'm ready to give it one." "You will be," he said. "And when that day comes, I just hope you remember this place." She stepped closer. "I'll remember you." For a moment it felt like they were standing on opposite sides of a decision neither wanted to make. The weight of it hung in the space between them. And for the first time since she crashed into his life, Isabel felt afraid. Not of being found, but of being left behind by the version of herself that had learned to breathe again here. The morning Isabel left was gray and windless, an eerie stillness settling over the wheat fields like the sky itself was holding its breath. She stood in front of the garage, her small duffel slung over one shoulder, the patched coat Ethan had lent her clutched tightly around her frame. The wind didn't blow, but the cold was everywhere. Ethan emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. His eyes were quiet, guarded, but kind, still. "Car's gassed up," he said, nodding toward the old Buick he'd prepped for her drive to Wichita. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood there a moment, not speaking. The silence between them no longer awkward, just waited. Like everything they wanted to say was in the air, but neither had the right to name it. Isabel stepped forward. "I hate this." He gave a small, sad smile. "Me too. I feel like I'm walking out of something before I know what it even was." "You're not walking out," he said gently. "You're going to face what needs facing, and that takes more guts than hiding ever did." "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, "but I'm still scared." Ethan nodded. "Good. That means you're doing something that matters." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, placing it in his hand. "What's this?" he asked. "Just something I couldn't say out loud." He looked at it but didn't open it. "Not yet." "I'll be back," she said quickly, as if she had to say it before she changed her mind. "I don't know when, and I don't know what I'll be then, but I'll come back." "I'll be here," he said. And then, without another word, she turned and got into the car. Ethan didn't move until the Buick disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up dust that clung to the empty sky like a farewell. In Wichita, Isabel met the storm head-on. Grayson was waiting at the private terminal, along with two men in dark suits and a woman with a camera phone trying not to look like a reporter. She ignored them all and walked straight into the waiting car without a word. The Monroe estate was as she remembered. Too big, too polished, too hollow. Marble that gleamed like judgment. Walls that echoed with expectations. Her father sat in the study, whiskey in hand, fireplace glowing behind him. He looked older, grayer, but the steel in his eyes hadn't dulled. "You're thinner," he said by way of greeting. "You're not," she replied. He sighed. "You humiliated this family. Do you have any idea what the press is saying?" "I don't care what the press is saying." "You should." "No, Dad. That's your world. It's not mine anymore." He stood. "Isabel, you're my daughter. You're the heir to everything I built. You don't get to just disappear." "I didn't disappear. I left. There's a difference. You owe this family." "I don't owe you anything." Her voice cracked like glass. "I gave you 20 years of obedience, of carrying your legacy like it was the only thing I was allowed to dream about. I'm done." He stared at her, stunned. "I'm not coming back," she said more quietly now. "Not to the company, not to the life you designed. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just free." She turned and walked out before he could say another word. In the weeks that followed, the world took notice. Headlines floated across screens. "Isabel Monroe returns, then walks away from Monroe Aviation, the billionaire heiress who chose a quiet life, from boardrooms to back roads." Where is Isabel now? But she gave no interviews, no statements. Instead, she worked quietly behind the scenes to establish something new, a foundation for young female pilots. scholarships for students in underserved communities. All named for her mother, the one person who had once whispered to a young Isabel, "You can fly wherever you want, even away." Back in Kansas, winter deepened. The wheat fields turned white, and the garage grew quieter without the sound of her footsteps, her laughter, her questions. Ethan kept working. He taught a local kid how to change a timing belt, delivered firewood to Mrs. Callahan, fixed the church's broken generator just in time for Christmas Eve service. But every now and then, he'd catch himself looking toward the end of the driveway, as if some part of him still expected to see that old Buick reappear through the frost. He hadn't opened the envelope, not until New Year's Day. He sat on the front porch, the sun low and gold over the snowy fields. He held the envelope in calloused hands, then slowly tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a drawing, pencil on cream stock, delicate and precise. It was the garage, his garage, and standing in front of it were two figures, him and her, side by side. No labels, no titles, just two people with sleeves rolled up and a field of wheat behind them. At the bottom, one line of handwriting. "Sometimes the best place to land is exactly where you crashed." He didn't cry, but he closed his eyes for a long time, and when he opened them, he was smiling. The days grew shorter, the silence longer. Ethan Cole moved through the garage like a man caught in a slow dream, methodical, capable, but quieter than before. The clang of tools echoed differently now, as if the walls missed someone. He still woke early, made coffee for two out of habit, then poured one cup down the sink. The mornings were colder. The laughter that used to warm the corners of the office was gone. The space Isabel had filled, lightly, without trying, now felt strangely larger in her absence. Her coat still hung behind the door. Her notebook still rested on the shelf, a bookmark peeking out halfway through the old man and the sea. He hadn't touched it. He couldn't. The barn, too, had changed. The half-repaired plane sat under its tarp like a relic, forgotten but not abandoned. Some mornings Ethan would stand in front of it with his coffee, arms crossed, remembering the way she had traced its wings with her fingers, murmuring promises of flight. But she was gone now, back to a world that had finally claimed her. And he was just a mechanic again, a good man, a quiet man, but alone. A week into the new year, a snowstorm rolled through town. Thick, wet flakes that buried fence posts and turned roads into ghost trails. Ethan shoveled the walk twice that day, even though no one was coming. That night, as he fed logs into the stove, there was a knock at the garage door. He opened it to find Lily Hammond, a teenage girl from down the road, bundled in an oversized hoodie and boots far too big. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, breath fogging in the air. "Sorry to show up late. My mom said you used to fix up stuff for kids at the school, like small engines, snowmobiles, things like that?" Ethan nodded. "Still do, sometimes." She held up a backpack-sized generator. "Shop project. It's busted. I've tried everything." He took it from her gently. "Bring it inside before your fingers fall off." She followed him in, stomping snow from her boots, glancing around the garage with wide eyes. "This place looks like something out of an old movie." "Abe, it's older than it looks," he said, kneeling by the bench. "So you want to be a mechanic?" "I want to be useful," she said. He looked up, surprised by the honesty in her voice. "I used to be angry all the time," she added. "Felt like I didn't matter. Then one of the teachers showed us this video about rebuilding engines, and I thought, maybe I could fix something too." Ethan said nothing, just smiled and handed her a screwdriver. "Then let's get to work." For the next hour, they sat side by side at the bench. He showed her how to clean the carb, rewire the ignition, check the oil flow. She listened closely, asked sharp questions. Her eyes sparkled when the generator finally sputtered to life with a low purr. "I did it," she whispered, grinning. "No," Ethan corrected. "We did it." She packed up the generator, gave him a proud nod, and headed into the snow with a promise to return with more projects. As the door closed behind her, Ethan stood still, the sound of the repaired machine still humming in his ears. It wasn't loud, but it was something. The next morning he received a letter in the mail, handwritten in careful script. "Dear Mr. Cole, we heard from Lily that you've been helping her learn basic mechanics. Would you be willing to consider a community class for the youth center? We've got a dozen boys and girls looking for direction, And not all of them are cut out for college. They need someone who can show them what it means to build something, with their hands and their hearts. Yours in gratitude, Marjorie Bennett, Director, Tilden Youth Services. Ethan stared at the letter for a long time. He set it down beside Isabel's drawing, the one of the two of them in front of the garage, sleeves rolled, ready for something bigger. He had told himself she'd been the spark, but maybe she'd left behind a fire. That afternoon, he gathered tools, made a list of supplies, and cleared space in the back of the garage. He wiped off the chalkboard he hadn't touched in years. It still carried faint outlines from when he'd used it to teach his daughter how to convert fractions while baking cookies. His hands moved without hesitation, not for distraction, but for purpose. The hum of a deeper rhythm returned, not fast, not loud, but steady. At dusk, a knock came again, this time softer. He opened the door and found a little girl standing there, no more than 7, bundled in a purple coat with mittens dangling from the sleeves. She held out a folded piece of construction paper. "You fixed my brother's scooter last fall," she said. "He said you were a good man." Ethan knelt to her height. "And what's this?" "A thank you card," she said shyly. He opened it to reveal a stick figure drawing, him with a wrench, a scooter, and a big smiling sun overhead. 3 words were written in glitter glue. "You help people." His chest tightened. He didn't know why, but the words reached places nothing else had in months. Later that night, as he sat alone at the kitchen table, he opened the drawer where he'd kept all the things he hadn't been ready to deal with. Old photos, sympathy cards, and Isabel's sketch. This time, he pulled it all out. He spread them across the table, not as memorials, but as blueprints of who he had been and who he was becoming again. The first sign that something was different came from the sky. It was a clear Saturday morning, crisp and bright, with not a single cloud over the Kansas plains. Ethan stood by the fence line behind the garage, sipping his second cup of coffee. The wind had a bite, but the sun was generous, spilling light across the dormant fields and the sagging roof of the barn. It was quiet, his kind of quiet, until he heard the low, familiar rumble overhead. A plane, small, sleek, cutting through the air like a silver arrow. Ethan squinted upward, shielding his eyes as the aircraft circled once, twice, then began to descend. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud on the makeshift strip just beyond the wheat field. It rolled to a stop near the barn, and for a moment Ethan didn't move. He just stared. The door of the plane opened, and there she was, Isabel. She stepped down the fold-out stairs with the ease of someone returning to a place she hadn't stopped thinking about. She wore jeans, boots, and a deep green jacket that caught the sunlight like a memory. Her hair was tied back, her eyes shielded behind aviators, but there was no mistaking her. Ethan set his mug down on the fence post and started walking. Neither of them spoke at first. When they met halfway between the garage and the field, Isabel stopped, lowered her sunglasses, and smiled. "Hi," she said. Ethan exhaled, part disbelief, part relief. "You came back. I told you I would. I wasn't sure you meant it. I wasn't sure I did, until I couldn't stop thinking about it." She looked around, taking in the scene. "Everything's just like I remembered, except colder." "Maybe," she said, "but it feels warmer than where I've been." They stood in silence again, the wind brushing against them, tugging at the hem of her coat. "I've missed this place," she said quietly. "Missed you." Ethan searched her face. "Are you back for a visit?" She shook her head. "I'm back to land." Back inside, Ethan made coffee while Isabel walked slowly through the garage. She ran her hand along the workbench, thumbed through her old notebook, still tucked on the shelf where she'd left it. "I watched your interview," Ethan said, setting her mug down on the table. "What interview?" "The one you didn't give," he said with a smirk. She laughed. "I tried to stay off camera, but the press always finds a way." He studied her. "You seemed different, clearer." "I am," she said. "Walking away from my family's company wasn't easy. They didn't understand. But I had to stop building a life I didn't believe in." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were plans, architectural sketches, funding breakdowns, letters of support. "I want to help you expand the garage, not just for cars, but for people. A training space, classrooms, a youth apprenticeship program, Something permanent. Something that lives beyond either of us. Ethan flipped through the pages, speechless. I've already secured partial funding, Isabel said. The rest is mine. I don't want the Monroe name on it. I want it to be called the Field of Second Chances. Ethan looked up, his eyes wet with the kind of emotion he didn't show often. Why me? He asked. Because when I had nothing, not a name, not a plan, not even a past I was proud of, you didn't ask for credentials. You just opened the door. That afternoon, word spread fast in town. Isabel Monroe had returned. The Isabel who crashed into their fields, helped fix their engines, and vanished just as quickly. Now she was back, with plans to build something that would change lives. Mrs. Callahan showed up first, apple pie in hand. Then Lily, the teenage girl Ethan had mentored, carrying a clipboard and two friends already signing up for classes that didn't yet exist. By sundown, half the town had stopped by, offering ideas, labor, or just warm wishes. Isabel stood next to Ethan the whole time, answering questions, laughing, reconnecting. They didn't announce anything officially, but it didn't matter. Everyone could feel it. Something new was taking root. That night, after the crowd had gone and the garage was quiet again, Ethan lit the stove and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a chipped glass. He handed it to Isabel and raised his own. To second chances, he said. She clinked her glass against his. And new landings. They sat together in silence, the soft crackle of the fire filling the space between them. I was scared, she admitted after a long pause. Of what? That you wouldn't want me back. That you'd moved on. I didn't move on, Ethan said. I moved forward. But that doesn't mean I closed the door. She reached across the table, took his hand. I don't know what this is yet, she said, but I know where I want to figure it out. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then let's figure it out here. Outside, the stars blinked into view one by one, like tiny promises scattered across the Kansas sky. And for the first time in years, the air around the garage didn't just carry the scent of oil and pine. It carried the quiet, steady hum of hope. Construction didn't start with noise. It started with conversations. Isabel had imagined trucks, blueprints, hard hats. But what came first were folding chairs in the garage, coffee in mismatched mugs, and the kind of discussions that felt more like town hall meetings than business plans. Ethan let her lead those first gatherings. She had a way of listening that made people talk, not just about engines and funding, but about what they wished they'd had when they were 17 and lost, about how school hadn't worked for everyone, about how life sometimes ran smoother when you had grease on your hands and someone who believed you could learn something worthwhile. She took notes, asked questions, never once mentioned her last name. They built trust before they poured a single drop of concrete. By March, the back half of the garage had been cleared and expanded. The old hayloft in the barn was converted into a quiet study nook. Locals showed up with scrap wood, donated time, even kitchen appliances from old restaurants long shuttered. Ethan oversaw the hands-on work, always teaching, always patient. Isabel handled the paperwork, permits, and grant proposals. Together, they moved like a team that had been working together for years. They named the new space the Field of Second Chances, just like the sketch she had once drawn and left behind. The first class had 12 students, 6 boys, 5 girls, and 1 single mother in her late 20s who said she wanted to learn what a carburetor does before life passes her by. Ethan taught them how to tear down a lawnmower engine. Isabel taught them how to open a bank account and write a resume. It wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a beginning. One day, while sorting through donated books, Isabel found herself pausing at the edge of the workbench where Ethan sat explaining gear ratios to 2 teenage boys. She watched him for a long moment, the way he crouched to their level, the way he pointed without patronizing, the way he laughed when one of them called a flywheel, that spinny thing. Later, when they were alone, she said, "You're more than a mechanic, you know." He looked up from the carburetor he was reassembling. "I just fix what's broken." "No," she said. "You teach people they're not broken to begin with." He set the tool down, his expression softening. "I had someone once who believed in me when I was a mess. One teacher. Changed everything." "You're that for them now." He shrugged. "I'm just paying it forward." "Exactly," she said. "That's the point." As spring warmed the ground, they hosted their first open house. Parents and neighbors came. Former students dropped by with job offers and thank you notes. One boy, Liam, who had barely spoken when he first arrived, stood in front of a crowd of 30 people and read a speech he'd written himself. Before this place, I didn't think I could do anything right. I messed up a lot, at school, at home. But here, Mr. Cole let me take apart a busted generator. I broke it worse. He didn't yell. He just said, "Good, now we get to build it better." That's what this place is. It's where we learn to build it better. The room was still when he finished. Then came applause. Slow, rising, honest. Isabel stood near the back, blinking away tears. Ethan didn't move for a long time, just stared at the boy, his heart too full for words. That evening, they sat outside the barn on 2 wooden chairs Ethan had built years ago. The sun dipped low over the fields. The sky was streaked in gold and lavender, the same colors that had greeted Isabel on the morning of her crash landing. "You've changed things," Ethan said quietly. She turned to him. "No, we did." He smiled. "You could have stayed gone. That would have been easier." "Easier isn't always better." "I ever tell you," he said, "how I got the idea to teach again?" "No. It was after you left. This kid, Lily, showed up with a busted generator and more attitude than know-how. I thought of you. How you'd sit and ask questions. How you never made anyone feel small." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You gave me something too, Ethan." "What's that?" "Permission to be someone different. Not the heiress, not the pilot, just a person who cares." He reached over and took her hand. No big gestures, no sweeping declarations. Just fingers interlaced in the twilight, warm and steady. By the time the fireflies came out, they were still sitting there, planning what to build next. More classes, scholarships, maybe even a second center in the next county over. But none of it felt rushed. They weren't chasing legacy. They were tending something alive, something earned, something real. By midsummer, the wheat fields had turned to gold. The sky above the Kansas plains stretched wide and endless, its blue so deep it felt almost holy. A breeze swept through the stalks, rustling them like whispered secrets, and carried with it the hum of tools and distant laughter from the garage. Inside the newly finished workshop, sunlight filtered through high windows and landed softly on rows of worn workbenches, chalkboards filled with grease-streaked diagrams, and a long table piled with graduation certificates. Ethan stood by the window, watching the students filter in. Some shy, some proud, all changed. Isabel stood beside him, holding a clipboard, though she wasn't checking names. She was just watching, taking it in. Today marked the first full class to complete the Field of Second Chances program. 12 students, 12 stories, each one a quiet rebellion against the narrative that said they'd never become more than what they were born into. "You ready?" Isabel asked. Ethan nodded, clearing his throat. "Never gave a commencement speech before. You talk to engines. This shouldn't be too different." He gave her a dry look, but smiled. "At least engines don't cry halfway through." She smirked. "Don't be so sure." The crowd gathered in the open barn, which had been swept clean and decorated with string lights, folding chairs, and hand-painted signs from the students. One read, "Fixing things, building people." Another simply said, "Home." Ethan stepped to the front, adjusting the microphone that had been donated by the local high school. He looked out at the faces, students, parents, neighbors. Mrs. Callahan sat in the front row with her walker and a tin of oatmeal cookies. Lily stood beside her, holding a camera. He took a deep breath. "When I lost my family," Ethan began, his voice steady, "I lost more than just people. I lost my purpose. I fixed engines because that's what I knew how to do, but I wasn't really living. Then one day a plane fell out of the sky, and it brought more than a pilot. It brought a chance to remember what hope feels like." He glanced at Isabel, who met his gaze with a soft, steady smile. "You all walked in here thinking you were broken," he continued. "But what I learned is this. People don't need to be fixed. They need to be believed in, encouraged, given the right tools and space to grow." A pause, and maybe a wrench. Laughter bubbled through the crowd. "You're not just graduates of a program," Ethan said, voice thickening. "You're builders. You've built something here. Skills, yes, but also a community, a future. And no matter where you go, You'll carry that with you. He stepped back, and Isabel stepped forward. She didn't use the mic. I spent years thinking success was something you measured in contracts and accolades, she said. But real success, real meaning, is found in places like this. In showing up, in starting over, in teaching others that their past doesn't define their future. She held up a single key attached to a brass tag engraved with the words, "Wings meet roots." This key opens the door to this space. And we're giving one to each of you, not because we expect you to come back, but because we want you to know you can, that you're always welcome, that this is your home too. One by one, the students came up to receive their certificates and keys. There were handshakes, tears, cheers. And when it was done, the barn swelled with music and the scent of potluck casseroles and barbecue, with kids racing in the yard and parents laughing in the shade. Isabel stood under the awning beside Ethan, barefoot now, a lemonade in one hand. "You did good," she said. "We did," he replied. She looked out at the barn, the students, the soft light of late afternoon. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "how different things might have been if I hadn't crashed here?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "you were always meant to land here. Not the way you did, but eventually." She smiled. "I like that." As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of peach and fire, Isabel wandered toward the porch of the garage where 3 rocking chairs waited. Ethan followed. They sat in silence for a while, watching the students dance and the wind chase itself through the wheat. Then softly, Isabel said, "You know that little girl who asked if I was your wife?" Ethan chuckled. "I remember." "You told her." "Not yet." She looked at him. "Well," she said, "maybe it's time we change that." Ethan turned toward her slowly. There was no dramatic gasp, no dropped glass, no sweeping music, just the sound of a breath caught in the middle of something beautiful. "You sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Not new, not flashy, just something he'd been carrying for months, hoping, waiting. Inside was a simple ring with a sky blue stone, set in brushed silver. Isabel stared at it, eyes shining. "It's the color of the Kansas sky," Ethan said, "the morning you landed." She took the ring, slid it on her finger, and leaned her head against his shoulder. Months later, they married in the same barn where the students had graduated. There were wildflowers in mason jars, laughter echoing across the fields, and a flock of geese overhead that flew in a perfect V. Silent witnesses to a love that had risen not from perfection, but from pieces gently put back together. And at dusk, as the last light slipped beyond the wheat, Ethan and Isabel stood outside the garage, arms around each other, hearts full. No more running, no more pretending. Just a man who fixed engines, a woman who once soared, and a life they'd built with open hands on soil that welcomed second chances. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what part of this story spoke to you the most? If you enjoy stories that celebrate kindness, second chances, and the quiet beauty of everyday love, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment that could lift your spirit. From all of us here, thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of a good heart.